This episode of No Filter is brought to you by Toyota Kluger.
A lot of families will hold on really tight while the parent is there. And as soon as a parent or the parent who's being cared for departs, then the gloves are off. Like, this was the string that held us together, and that thread's been cut now.
From Mama Mia, I'm Mia Freedman, and welcome to No Filter. There's a stage in everyone's life where you realise that your parents are not bulletproof. For some of us, that comes when something like driving a car suddenly becomes much more dangerous for your mum or your dad than it once was. But for many of us, that moment actually comes much earlier, often when a parent suddenly becomes unwell. When Amal Awad's father was diagnosed with kidney failure, it impacted him both emotionally and physically, of course, but it also really changed the relationship that Amal had with both her parents. She became determined to support her father and her mother through what was happening to them, her father's loss of independence and the physical work that came with caring for someone that her mother suddenly faced. So Amal made a surprising decision. And that decision changed everything for both her and them. She says if you're ever going to truly get to know your parents as people, chances are it's going to happen in adulthood. She's written a book about her experience, which will be the experience of so many of us eventually, or perhaps you've been through it already or are going through it now. Amal understands how you feel, and she joined me to talk about it. Here's Amal. Amal, most of us grow up with very little curiosity about our parents. They're just kind of there to facilitate our needs, and they orbit around the centre of the universe, which is, of course, us. Is that what your childhood was like?
Yeah, I think my perspectives were slightly different with my parents in terms of my father was sort of a bit more of a forbidding figure. He was always working and he was quite tough, you know. He was sort of a bit stricter than my mum in my mind. My mum, I really just admired her. Like, I thought she was so beautiful, and I loved watching her put her eye makeup on and all these little things. Like, it was just, I had her on a pedestal for sure, like my mum. But yeah, like in terms of my perspective as a child, I just wanted to be a grown-up. I remember I'd sit on the bus next to my mum and just look at her and say, look, we're not together. I was like 5 or 4. I'd be like, we're not together, Mum. I'm on my own. I'm an adult. And she would just sort of say, okay, no worries. And she really allowed me to grow in that way.
So you were very independent as a child.
I wanted to be. As I got older, obviously, the reins got tighter on me being, in the family that I was in and in the environment I was in. But at the same time, I have this really interesting sort of hindsight element happening now, which is hearing some stories from my mum, I didn't think about her perspective. So, when they took me out of a public school and put me into a private girls' school, I saw it as them just being very strict, you're just really conservative. And then recently my mum made this comment. She said something like, well, you were telling me that you were getting hassled at school because you were developing before everyone else. And I'm like, and she said, well, you sounded like you were really uncomfortable and having a hard time, so we wanted to protect you. And I was just astounded at my own ignorance. It was just such it was a humbling moment for me because I hadn't given my mum that credit of actually really just trying to look out for me, not just keep me in this protective bubble. But, I mean, it takes adulthood to do that, and it takes time to understand when you're an adult yourself and you have to make really important decisions about life. It's hard.
So you grew up in quite a strict family. Your parents are migrants. There are how many siblings?
So I have 4 brothers. I actually had to think about that for a second.
There's 5 of you and you're the only girl.
I'm the only girl. So I have 1 younger brother and the rest are older than me.
So I imagine you were quite protected.
I was protected.
Were you spoiled?
Well, see, everybody says that, but I don't think I was. I think
Daddy's girl?
No. I think I had it quite hard, to be honest. I think my oldest brother had it tough because he was the first child, and I had it tough because I was the only girl. That's how I look at it. I always say it was an equal opportunity household when it came to strictness in a lot of ways, but I do think it's always harder for a girl. It doesn't matter what the culture is, to be honest. I think we are conditioned to see women or females as needing protection, and we're not in the habit of trying to change the reasons why.
Were you rebellious as a kid?
I was like, I think, have you ever done those things where they say to you, when was the last time you really felt like yourself? And I'm like, oh, too easy. I was 5, because I was this really cheeky kind of headstrong, fiery girl. And I was reminded of this by one of my best friends. She was telling me that. She's like, do you remember you at 5? And I'm like, no. But I think that was, that's instructive, isn't it? That there's a point where people start to steer you away from that personality. And whenever I run workshops or any kind of creative workshop, whether they're students or adults, I always say, I want you to go back to a time when you just felt you could do something without judgment, in terms of a creative pursuit. And that will tell you a lot about who you are. And so I think really infancy was probably when I was really my most rebellious. And then I think around 30, I rebelled again.
You had a second go at it.
My mum actually says to me, and this is something I dealt with in my last book, she says, you've always been a bit rebellious. And I really scoffed at that because I thought, do you know me? I'm such an obedient daughter and all this sort of stuff. And she said, no, you don't like tradition. And it's true. I think in my 20s, I was very wedded to tradition. I was really I need to do everything the right way. And then I think in my 30s, I started to just, clip my wings and say, I'm going to just see what feels right.
I think sometimes the term rebellious, if it's used by a parent or a child, can mean that you're choosing a different way from your parents.
Absolutely.
A different kind of life or a different way of living your life. And perhaps, I suppose every parent subconsciously expects their kid to do the same as they did and make the same choices that they did. So I think sometimes the word rebellious can be used just meaning different choices.
Yeah, you've rejected the way I think you will be safe in this world.
Yeah.
And my mum said it in a nice way, you don't like tradition. And I think that's true. She understood more about me before I knew it, that I wasn't going to be comfortable just living the life that I thought I should live. And that was instructive, It was important.
When we're young, we tend to idolize our parents, and then there is what usually comes in adolescence when you actually realize how flawed they are, often in an extreme way where you're the worst person, whether you articulate that verbally or not. Yeah, you don't understand me. No one's ever been as embarrassing as you. And then as we get older and we become adults, we sort of start to see our parents as people, and if not as equals, certainly as people with wants and needs of their own, not just as they relate to us. At what age did you have that kind of relationship with your parents?
I really think I've come to this quite late. So I'm 40 now. Let's say I've been hanging out with my parents for the last couple of years in the process of writing this book, but before that even, I really finally came to understand that about them. The complexity of their experiences and their emotional spectrum. It was as wide as mine. I had no idea. It was shamefully, I would say it was almost a revelation. And it's not that I didn't know parts of that. I understood bits and pieces, but the whole picture hadn't come together for me yet. And I think that's because what we do in life in general is we project. We constantly look at another person's experience in relation to our own and how it affects us. And so I think I had done that my whole life in terms of, my adolescence was I had better shut myself down a bit so that I don't get into trouble and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And I was probably surrounded by the wrong certain people around me probably didn't help me with my self-esteem. And so when your mum and dad are going through their own things, they're trying to support you getting through your school. I mean, I didn't know things about how hard my dad was working to get me through private school. It wasn't easy for him to do that for me.
Money's a funny concept when you're a kid, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you don't see it a lot, and school's not something that you enjoy. So the idea that your parents could be making big sacrifices, of course, some kids are aware of it, but a lot of parents keep that from their children, how tough it is.
They don't telegraph it, exactly. And it's like I know that there are some people who definitely had it harder than me. And maybe that's why I wasn't so aware of it, because my parents never let me feel that way. They always made me feel protected. And, I wrote this piece for Frankie years ago that just popped up on my radar the other day about the joys of being a migrant kid, actually, because so much of what is said is negative. I couldn't have a Vegemite and butter sandwich at school. Well, I did that. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I had to bully in a thermos. But the point is I've experienced, all these different things. And I didn't know, but another writer had told me that I reached out to another writer about something. She said, I actually wrote in response to that piece saying how much I love my migrant family too and how much I love those experiences. And I think it's easy to forget, just the joy of living that you have. It's not always hard. It's not always doom and gloom. And so in that sense, I think the complexity of your experiences overall, not just your parents, become much clearer when you are less wedded to what they mean for you, if that makes sense. Like when you are less detached from the outcomes of those experiences. When you're young, you want everything your way. You want to be free. You can't have that. When you're an adult and you're living life and it's hard and you've got to actually do things yourself and think for yourself, you really do. You have this moment of almost like wisdom and respect, and it's just like, oh, wow, okay, I get it now. I understand those experiences in a new light.
For a lot of people, women in particular, having children can be a real watershed moment in their relationship with their parents, particularly their relationship with their mother, and you can understand things that perhaps you didn't. You've chosen not to have children, and if it's not too personal, I wanted to ask you whether that was something that came between you and your mother, like her wish that you would have children and your wish not to.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think before I got married, I had a conversation with my parents about my wedding was coming up, I think. And I think I made an offhanded comment like, well, I don't know if I want to have kids. And it's not like I'm someone who really is one way or the other at the moment. I could go one way or the other in some ways, but I'm also 40. Like I don't.
So you haven't closed the door on it?
I think the door's swinging closed more than it's swinging open, to be honest. Yeah, it's a tough one. I feel conditioning has really affected me, and I think there are a lot of women who I'm sure can relate to this, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who sit one way or the other, absolutely. I have friends who could not wait to be mothers. And when I was younger, I think I felt that way. I think when I was in my 20s, I absolutely thought, because I used to help raise my nephews and niece, I loved them. I love them now, but what I mean is I love taking care of them. I feel like sometimes life wears you down but also takes you in different directions, and you have to honour that. You have to sort of look at that and say, where is my energy best placed right now? Am I going to be able to give my full attention to this, my full love and respect to the process that this involves? And I think with my mum, what's happened with my dad having kidney failure and our whole lives being affected by that, and, obviously he's the most, you start to just prioritize. You start to look at the things that matter the most to you in that moment. Now, I give my mum a lot of credit. She's an extremely smart woman, very switched on, and I think she understands that it might not be for me. So, but when I had that conversation that I was referring to with my parents, and I said something about, well, I don't know if I want to have kids, and my dad's like, well, why are you getting married? And I thought that was really interesting because it's true. I think there's a lot of expectation that that's just what you're meant to do. And I was watching. I didn't watch the whole thing. I don't tend to watch everything just because everyone's watching it, but the Marie Kondo special on Netflix. And I was just curious because I actually really love what she represents, which I think is the Shinto tradition where every object has an energy. And that gets lost in all of the hoopla about what she's doing. But I watched the first episode, and it was a family who had, the two kids. They had the house. They'd accumulated a lot of crap that they didn't need. And I mean, I don't know, I'm a very sort of feeling person. I consider myself fairly intuitive, and I was just watching the body language of this couple and the disgust that the man had that his house looked like this. And it was like, wow, this is the conditioning we have in society, that the woman, she worked, but she was also the mother, but she was expected to maintain this perfect home. And I think if I'm going to be rebellious about anything, it's this idea that I need to be this perfect housewife and, the perfect mother. And I have deep respect for mothers. I think it's a really hard job, and I'm not going to do it unless I feel, even if I can, I mean, let's say, I don't even know, like if I could be a mum, but if I was going to be one, I want to do it properly. And I just remember feeling really strongly when I watched that special, like this is the problem. I think a lot of people wrap it up in this pretty paper and say this is what your life should look like, and if it doesn't, you're missing out. And there are many ways to be creative in this world, to be fertile, to contribute to the world that you're in, and it doesn't have to be that way.
When did you first become aware that your parents weren't bulletproof?
Look, they've had their share of difficulties. My dad had a car accident when I was very young. So that was probably it was a very early revelation for me. I think I was about 4, and I remember going to the hospital, and my dad was there for quite a while. So I think that was probably the first time I understood that my parents could get hurt. And there were a couple of things along the way as well where I saw that my mum had suffered. I think that if anything's really come out of this journey, the biggest revelation has been how incredibly human they are, but also just my mum's suffering as a migrant woman was really important for me to understand. Like I don't think we really understand the level of difficulty women face coming to a country where,
as first-generation migrants.
Yeah, where it's not their language, they don't have their families with them. This was well before, FaceTime and WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter. Like, phone calls were expensive. You have to pay rent, so you don't get to talk to your family every day, or it's just it was a different world, and I honestly don't know how she did it. And I just have all the respect in the world for people who go through those things and come out on top.
How sudden was your father's decline in his health?
It was pretty gradual for a while. So the very first time we really understood something wasn't right, I think he had actually collapsed before, but when he collapsed and he was in hospital, and then they were like, we have to figure out what's going on here. And it was diagnosed as kidney failure, and, he'll need dialysis. And that was when it was sort of really hit us. And Dad was like quite resilient about it. I think he was very hopeful, and he said, it's okay. This is, I'm going to get through this, and, I'm going to be hopeful about it and all. And he was fine. And I think the hard part for my father was more when he stopped driving. That loss of independence is crushing for a lot of people. It came up so often in my research. When I would speak to people, they would all say everything was okay until the person couldn't drive anymore. That was the day I really understood sort of the loss of liberty is the thing that most people fear. I think a lot of people can live with taking a pill or being strapped to a machine. What they don't want is to feel like they don't have freedom. And that's, I think, why aging scares people, why illness scares people, because you can't just be free. You are limited in some ways.
And for a lot of people, they're caught in that sandwich generation between your children perhaps getting their license and suddenly that's seeing them move away from you in a surge of independence because they don't need you to drive them everywhere anymore. And then while your parents lose their license, which means suddenly they're so much more dependent on you.
Yeah, I think that was really it's not fun for Dad. Like, I don't think he loves seeing us. Like, there's a moment in the book that I relate where it's really sweet. Where he says, I wish I could see you every day. And I think he means that. Like, I think he loves being around his kids, but I think he just misses having his ability to come and go as he pleases. And fair enough. I don't blame him one bit.
What made you decide to start spending every Friday with your parents?
Yeah, so Mum and Dad, I wouldn't say that they're like the most devout Muslims, but they're practicing Muslims, they pray and all of that. And Dad was doing his Friday prayers at the mosque and he was still driving, but I felt maybe just needed a bit of support or I wanted to ease his load a little bit. So I volunteered. I thought, I'm a freelancer right now. I have that capacity. So I basically volunteered my Fridays to my parents. I said, this is what I'm going to do. Didn't necessarily go down that well with my mum. She wasn't sort of super keen on me giving up my Fridays.
You say that there was a period of adjustment because she felt you were wasting your Fridays.
Yeah,
and
she's like, what are you doing here? What are you...
Yeah. Did she also feel a little bit like, hey, back off, I've got this?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't think of it that way. I think my mum is definitely my dad's, like, bodyguard. Like, I have to, like, I can't tell you, like, sometimes I'll talk to my dad and she'll answer from the back seat. It's quite funny. Yeah, look, maybe, I don't know. I think it was more... I think we were all understanding that our lives were changing in a way that was not going to go back to what we knew. It was just, that was it. It was a new way forward and we were a little bit dizzy. That's the best way. It was like vertigo. It was like, how do we do this? What does the environment now look like? I always use an expression that someone taught me years ago and it was, we don't go down or up, we spiral upwards. And when you spiral, it means, sometimes you think you're looking at the same thing, but it's not. It's from a different perspective. And so I feel like your life, it doesn't necessarily become something unknowable or completely brand new. It's just unfamiliar because you haven't seen it from that height. You haven't seen it from that perspective. And it doesn't have to be horrible. We all have the capacity to get through the troubles of our lives. We do. We just have to choose how we do that. And the easy way, the basic way to do that is to just get angry and to blame other people for your problems and to never go inward and to never try to be better for yourself, for the people around you. And I'm not that person. I'm somebody who will always look at something and say, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean if I change how I look at it? How can I do that. And so I was just patient with the process. It was hard. It was really hard because I felt like it had affected my father. It had affected my mother. I was in grief to an extent, and nobody could really just talk about it in those terms.
What do you think you were grieving for?
Just the fact that my dad couldn't have the freedom that he had before. I could see that deeply affected him, and just his health wasn't the same. That's, that's it. I could see in front of him. I'm not trying to romanticize my relationship there. It's like my dad is who he is. He's an independent person. He doesn't need me for everything. It's not, I never want to give that impression, and I was really mindful of that when I wrote the book. And whenever I talk about things, I always try to tell him, because I don't want him to ever feel like I'm, some people want to talk about parenting the parents and this stuff, and that's not what I'm doing. My parents don't need me to parent them. They are adult human beings. They have full capacity of their minds. They can make up their own mind. But there are things that I can do that will help them at this point in their lives, and that's what I do.
And do you see that, I suppose it's also everybody seeing into the future and maybe not acknowledging it, that those needs are only going to get greater and your involvement is going to have to get greater. Was there a time that you sat down with your brothers and said, hey, what's the plan?
In our own Arab way.
What did that look like?
Like throwing, sentences here and there, let's say. No, look, I wouldn't say we sat down as a group. We've definitely spoken individually, like between ourselves. I have, varying relationships with my brothers. So, I have different conversations with them. And that was obviously essential to do as well. But, I can't speak for them. I would say that everybody's lives have changed, like, through this process. And we've all had to readjust and figure out what our contribution will be and how we want to take that. And I would say one thing I have tried to do is be consistent. So even though I felt like I probably started out a lot more depressed than I realized, because when I went back through the book and I was editing the book, I was like, wow, I was really down. I didn't realize how down I was. I didn't give up on it. I was like, this is just going to take some time. It's just going to take some getting used to, because, frankly, I think what it is, and this is the thing that people struggle with maybe the most, is that it is scary. You love your parents. Some people don't have that kind of relationship.
Confronting, isn't it? Mortality.
It's just, there's no pleasant way to go through this, but there is a way to make it more meaningful.
Are you in the car right now with the kids and struggling to hear me talk? Maybe you've got kids who are complaining that they're too hot or too squished or uncomfortable. Maybe it's time for a car upgrade. The new Toyota Kluger ensures that there's enough room for every member of the family. With leather-accented seats, 6-speaker touchscreen audio system and a sleek finish, the kids won't have anything to complain about. Plus, the Kluger is equipped with 7 SRS airbags and all the latest technology to keep you and the family safe. The Toyota Kluger, built for families, designed for attention. You spoke to a lot of other people as well, because every experience is different. I wanted to ask you about some of the other people whose stories you tell in the book. Tell me about Julia.
Julia, she's really interesting. She is a woman, or an example of somebody who is quite resentful towards her parents or her family. She feels like her childhood wasn't ideal. She certainly didn't feel valued as a daughter, but, being the eldest daughter, she is suddenly tasked with the responsibility, and she's, I think, in her 50s. So she's not she's at the point of her life where she has done the hard yards and she wants to enjoy herself. And, there's an imbalance in the family in terms of what she's expected to do. And she was really forthright in saying, I don't like it. I'm not happy about it. My life was really hard, and I really resent having to do this now.
What does she have to do?
Like help out with her parents and be a carer in that sense. Not full-time, not living with them. It's rare that you come across somebody who's really full-time in the parents' house. That wasn't common. I don't think I really even came across that at all. But, one of the doctors I spoke to put it in this context of like, suddenly everything is just turned upside down. And I sensed that with Julia a lot, like this sense of I had plans and now I have to factor in this. What was really coming up was that she was grieving that she never had the relationship with her parents that she wanted, and now she was having to care for them, and it wasn't going to rectify that past situation in her mind. That's how I understood it. And I saw a lot of emotion in how she dealt with that. And I think I even say, like, she cried, and it was a really difficult experience, even retelling what she was going through. And this is the thing, the family dynamic was front and center for so many people, because I've said this quite often, that, a lot of what happens in life happens below the surface. You can avoid a lot of potholes with the right car.
Family dynamics, certainly.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden somebody gets sick or is aging. That's not so doable anymore. You have to be really honest about the dynamics of your family, because you're going to need to work together. And it's going to expose the bones, essentially. That's how I feel. And it just came up all the time. It was not something that, oh, well, this is interesting. Maybe there are some family issues here. No, it was across the board. People grappling with their past experiences with those people as well.
Can you talk about Emma?
Emma was, she's the one who, she was getting her father onto sort of the My Aged Care portal, and she's a counsellor, and she sort of really understood, I guess, to sound a bit like too much like a screenwriter here, but, the human condition. She really understood that humans come packaged with so many troubles and problems, and she was really switched on when it came to sort of the trauma that people experience around this, but also just there's reason to be concerned. At the moment we have a Royal Commission into aged care. It's long overdue. And why? Because elder abuse is rampant. And, at the time I was researching this book, euthanasia was a big thing as well. And, one of the things that people would argue against euthanasia for was, well, what's going to stop a child from basically, helping a parent die so that they can get the inheritance? That was the big concern, because aged care workers I spoke to said, an old person might come into a home and develop a relationship with someone, for example, another woman or whatever, and the kids would separate them because they didn't want the inheritance to go to somebody new. And so this old person is,
denied
aging,
some small comfort.
Yeah, aging quite in sort of this really quite potentially difficult way in a nursing home, has found the comfort of a partner, and the children have separated them. So I think that this is the thing, it's not black and white. But she was really, really switched on when she was talking about just the mental aspect of what it's like for the person who's aging as well, the denial that comes with that. And there was a funny story about, how her father didn't want to go to a particular place because everybody in there was old, even though he himself was, is old. And I think that's, my mum jokes about that with my dad once in a while. He'd be like, I don't want to go there. Everyone there is old. And she's like, what are you, a spring chicken? And and I think you got parallel journeys here. You have the journey of the person who is a quote unquote carer or a child or whatever you want to call it. And they are trying to layer that person's journey onto their own. And that's the big mistake we make. You can't live that person's journey for them. You've got to find a way to connect them, as opposed to try to be a proxy for their experience or their pain or their suffering, because you're never going to be able to take it off for them anyway. All you can do is try to support them in that process.
One of the most difficult decisions people have to make is the decision to put their parents in care. Sometimes the parents are involved and agreeable to that decision. Other times, and often, they really resist it. What are some of the stories and the things that you learnt about that decision-making process through writing the book?
Yeah, I talk about the nursing home fate, and they were really particularly heartbreaking stories. Usually it was when the parent had dementia and had become a danger at home, where, they would turn the stove on and there was nothing in the pan and, nearly set the place on fire. Or the thing about the nursing home is it's very easy to sort of look at it in a negative way, because for the most part they are unpleasant places. Like nobody ever said, yes, please, I want to go there. In fact, most people were telling their kids, if I end up there, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be alive. And obviously we have massive problems with aged care, because we don't like thinking of aging as something that's going to affect most of us. We want to pretend it's not a problem, and that's why we're going to have problems down the track, because we're not setting up a better future for anyone right now. But the thing that was interesting was I I really feel for a lot of the aged care workers who do an amazing job. They're underpaid, understaffed,
Undervalued,
underskilled sometimes. And unfortunately, what's going to happen is because of the negative press, and look, fair enough, like we have to look at and interrogate the state of aged care, but there were some really decent people who have done their best to try to make life better for those people who are in an aging, who are aging in nursing homes. Another thing about nursing homes is, and I'm sorry if I'm rattling on a little bit here, but there is just so much that I wanted to unpack about this. One thing about dementia is people don't realise that you can put things like photos up on the walls of that person in their younger years and they will recognise themselves. So one of the doctors I spoke to actually said, we encourage people to do that. And, for some people, I remember listening to a podcast years ago where somebody decided just to play along with the person who had dementia, like instead of making them feel like they were crazy, and it changed everything. The whole dynamic for those people changed because I think dementia is really hard for the people watching it, The saddest thing for me with the nursing home one was I think Delma was saying she'd go in and she'd just see all these people lined up against the window. So where I think we're really failing with nursing homes is there are examples around the world where they're doing it a lot better. So, they build nursing homes near childcare centres. They make sure that the residents of that nursing home have access to pets. They meet with children. They have entertainment. People shouldn't be treating nursing homes like sort of some form of palliative care where you're just meant to be forgotten and die.
I wanted to ask you about the difference in the expectation of daughters rather than sons in caring for ageing parents.
Well, that's actually one of the points Emma made. It's interesting because I went in thinking I really wonder what the cultural differences are. I really had this bias almost in my mind of I wonder which, is this a thing where, a certain culture does it better? But I don't think my dad minds as much when I'm there because
I think it's more not so much the expectations of the parents but more the expectations of the siblings. It's like, oh, she'll get this.
No.
So it was pretty equal in yours?
I never felt that from my brothers, I would say, in my case, for sure, but it's definitely not the case more generally. And that's what I was trying to say was I thought that culturally that would be the issue. I didn't perceive that so much when people like Emma said to me, no, I'll tell you what the problem is. It's the gender imbalance. It's the expectation that women – now, I don't know if my brothers or my parents thought, well, it's okay, you're a girl. So, I don't know if that's what they thought, but they've never expressed that to me, whereas I know other people have absolutely felt the full pressure of their family.
And I've seen that many times.
One woman, she had a really heartbreaking story and she was telling me that, because she wasn't married but she's older. She wasn't, she's sort of leaning more towards, I think, late 40s or maybe early 50s. And she was saying, she had a younger sister who herself wasn't married, but she was the little pet of the family and nobody expected her to, give up her life for the parents who needed full care, by the way. She was expected and that she was judged very harshly for not handing over her entire schedule to caring for these parents, which she wasn't equipped to do, frankly. It's not what her job was, she's not a nurse or anything like that. And so without doubt, I think the statistics are, I think 2.7 million unpaid carers in Australia. I think close to 1 million are primary carers, which means, people like me, who are just, ferrying their parents around or just spending time with them in an informal way and helping out with chores or helping out with little things, whatever. 2/3 of those are women. So the problem for women is that they are a lot of the time sandwich generation. So my friend Chelsea Anderson, who features in the book, who runs a retirement village, she said to me in a conversation, you're lucky, you're not, you don't have the children to worry about as well. And it's I don't know how I would do it, to be honest. I feel like so many things compete for my time as it is. So I have full admiration for women who are mothers and on top of that are caring for parents. And one pharmacist I spoke to said, you see it all the time, women coming in with a newborn in their arms and they're getting meds for their father. It's a very common story. So look, there's no solid research. It wasn't my job to empirically prove this. It was so obvious in the fact that the majority of the stories are women talking to me. I couldn't find a lot of men. The way we talk to women or about women is you are the carers, you are kind, you're patient, you're more feminine. That's why you're better at this. And so therefore they get roped in. Now, look, far be it for me to say you shouldn't do that. Like, if that's, I take great joy being with my parents. So it's not for me. Like, I don't think it's some sort of burden. But it is a problem if somebody feels that it's affecting them, because they might be impacted financially, they might be impacted mentally, they might not have the capacity and still have to push through and prioritize every single person around them.
So it's like women are the default expectation, whereas anything a man does is awesome because their expectations of what they will do are quite low.
They're given a lot of leeway because they are still the breadwinners. They are still the men. They are still leading society. And
sometimes you get women looking after their parents-in-law. I've seen that happen many times too.
Totally. Look, I think it comes down to that female perception, that idea that you're the carer, you're the nurturer. Women are nurturing naturally. And, I mean, that's not the truth because some women are not at all nurturing in that way and some are. It's the human nature is what it is.
Amal, what about the role of geography? That can be really fraught, can't it, when maybe one sibling's moved overseas or one sibling's moved interstate. And so just by the nature of where the other one lives nearby, they are, I'm going to say burdened, or the expectation is there that they will have to do what's required because you can't fly in from Hong Kong or Melbourne or Perth, when mum's in Brisbane. What do you do?
That's when the family dynamics get tested well and truly. And I think there's one example of a story in there where the sisters were separated by, quite a lot of distance, but they got along. So there was a really healthy respect, and because the sister overseas is a nurse, she would say, this is what the doctor said, what do you think? So they had a really healthy relationship. So that was really refreshing to hear.
It's not usually that way though, or is it? I mean, doesn't resentment build?
Of course. But I mean, it's going to do that even if you live 2 suburbs away, I think. So this is the thing. If you're the kind of person who says, my location is more important to me than being where you are to help you through this, I don't know what the circumstances of that situation is. Maybe it's unavoidable. But if it isn't, that's when you've got to ask some questions. Well, maybe you're just a selfish person and that's the decision you've made, or you've decided that your priority isn't seeing a parent through their aging years or helping a sibling see the parent through those aging years. And that's like there are so many circumstances that could affect that. But if it's something where the person is very purposely saying, I can't come because I don't want to, that's going to show in the family dynamics. And I think the biggest thing that happens from what I've observed is a lot of families will hold on really tight while the parent is there. And as soon as a parent or the parent who's being cared for departs, then the gloves are off. It's like, or I just don't need to be around you anymore. Like this was the string that held us together and that thread's been cut now. So see you later. And we forget we're adults. Like we don't have the same sort of allegiance that we would have had to family when we were younger, when we felt a little bit more like we were reined in and stuck and, well, I can't choose you. You know what I mean? So I think, I don't know, I feel like family, it's going to be the thing that defines your experience of this. And I also would encourage, but I get asked this at a lot of events, what do you do when, my sister is like this or I was like, well, how comfortable do you feel having honest conversations? Because I think the sticky conversations are the things that people are trying to avoid all the time. They don't want to talk about it. And it's like, so instead you're just going to build up resentment, get angry, and it's going to explode. And it's really like just have an honest conversation, have a fight, whatever, but move on, talk about it. Don't let it build up inside of you because you're not a robot. You're not meant to absorb everyone else's pain. You're not a sponge to just take on everybody else's crap. And that's what I think a lot of women do. They suffer through things. They take it on the chin and they say, I have to be a good daughter, or I have to be a good sister, or I'm a woman and I'm a mother. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of instances as well of like people wanting to have kids because they think their kids will look after them maybe. So maybe they're thinking, well, I'd better be perfect so that my kids, you know what I mean? Like you don't know what's influencing that mindset.
And we've been talking a lot about siblings and resentment and expectations, but in many cases it might be an only child and there's no one else to step up.
I always feel like your outer world is a reflection of your inner one. And I don't mean to sound too lofty here or cheesy, but if you are a mess of a person, your life is going to reflect that. And if your relationships are messy, there's something going on in each person involved in that scenario that has not been dealt with. We are experts at projection as human beings. It's the number one thing we do. We will look at something and find everything that's wrong with it because it's something that is within us as well. And it shows so strongly with family because you're stuck with them, and we're sort of raised to believe that you have to automatically love your family, and it's kind of a weird idea, isn't it? That I'm just going to love you because we share the same blood, whereas isn't love earned? It's something that you earn. And so when you're old enough to make that decision for yourself, it gets a lot harder to be authentic about that because you have to sort of be honest and go, well, actually, I wouldn't spend time with you if I didn't have to.
Since you wrote the book, you now don't just spend Fridays with your folks, you also spend Tuesdays. What are those days like?
I try to go a couple of days now. Yeah. I love it. I find my parents endlessly interesting and amusing. I just remember thinking like there are so many riches that I've uncovered being in my parents' presence, and growth I think is the big thing as well. Like my mother and I have talked a lot about things that I don't think we necessarily see things very similarly. A lot of the time my mum has a very conservative view. I don't, vice versa. But one time we were having a conversation and she said something which I just really was touched by, and she just said, you're my voice now. And that was a really important moment for me, and I don't think we would have had that moment if I had not spent so much time with my mum and dad. And for me, I really, as somebody like, I think I've always been somebody who is always looking around me. When I was younger, there were so many things I wanted that I felt were out of my reach and I didn't have. And I wasn't so concerned with inner peace. I was concerned with my outer world. And I'm quite different now. I think I'm someone who's very, very focused on my inner being, my inner self, and the peace that you can have without having much at all. And I think that that's what I try to bring to my days with my parents as well. A sense of there are things lost, but there are things found as well. And I can't say that my dad's always excited about life. He's obviously going through what he's going through. But I know he loves seeing me, and I know that my mum, I think she really appreciates it. So, while she was very resistant at the start, and I think she still feels the burden of it sometimes, she's like, she always says, if you've got work, you do it. Like, don't come on days if you can't come. But I think she truly appreciates our presence. One of my brothers does more time, actually. He spends a few days with my parents, and we all get what we get out of it.
When you've got little kids, often you'll get stopped, usually by old people in supermarkets, old ladies, who will say, make sure you savor every moment. It goes so fast. And that can feel like a lot of pressure because you're just trying to get through the day. And quite frankly, you want the moments to go faster because there's a lot of them in a day and a night. And, what do they say? That the days are long, the years are short. The same applies at the other end of life, doesn't it? When you become aware that your parents aren't going to be around forever, and maybe you better make the most of some of that time you can have with them.
Definitely. I'm actually, like, just speaking to you now, I still get emotional thinking about it sometimes. I really wish for people to have that journey, to have the courage to take that journey, to try to make amends. I think we need to stop looking for these really neat solutions to feel great about everything 24/7. It's okay to find this hard. It's okay to not always know what to do. You're not there. If you're not a doctor, you're not a doctor. Don't try to be a doctor. Be a daughter.
Thanks so much, Amal.
Thank you.
Amal's book is called Fridays with My Folks. It's beautifully written, and you can buy it from Booktopia or in bookstores. Next week, Gabby Stroud is back on No Filter. Gabby is such an incredible guest. I often cite that episode as one of my favourite episodes when I'm asked about the most memorable No Filters I've done. And if you didn't hear her last interview, you'll want to go back and listen to it. There's a link in the show notes. Gabby's a teacher. Well, she used to be a teacher. And she broke up with teaching a few years ago because the profession that she used to really love became more about data collecting on students and serving this never-ending list of parent demands. And she just got jack of it. She was really burnt out. So she wrote this book called Teacher, which I spoke to her about, that was such an absolute eye-opener. And it went on to be an unexpected smash hit and hit the top of the bestseller lists. Now she's written a new book. It's called Dear Parents, and it's all about helping parents understand their role in their children's lives as lifelong teachers. It's actually a very funny book. Again, I just loved it. And she joins me next week to talk about it. You're going to love this episode with Gabby. Plus, before I go, we have another brand new podcast. This is totally different to what you've just been hearing me talk about. It's a dating podcast. It's called Eligible. And the idea behind this, whether you're single or not, it's so pervy to listen to. But women, and a lot of men, but women in particular, keep saying to us that they are sick of the superficial nature and the demoralising business of the dating apps. That swiping left and right, it's also superficial. So we thought about the idea of love at first sound. What about someone's voice? That is such a powerful driver of the way you feel about someone, or it can be. So we've recorded this new podcast. It's called Eligible. Each week, Rachel Corbett interviews an eligible person. They can be male, female, or gender non-binary. The only condition is that they're interested in dating women, because we are a women's podcast network and we know that the bulk of our audience are women. So she interviews the person, you get to hear their voice, and we've also got receipts. We get 3 women in the life of this eligible person, and they have to speak about them, and we include that as part of the podcast. And the twist in the tale is that you have to listen all the way through, and then when you get to the end, Rachel will give you a password, and you can use that password on mamamia.com.au, and we'll show you where it is. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you enter it. And only by entering it can you see images of the eligible person you've just been listening to, and also details about where to contact them. We hope you'll join us. I've listened to the first episode. It's so great. Even if you're not single, it's just a delight to listen to. And so you can find that wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify. Did you know they have podcasts on Spotify? Until next week, I am Mia Freedman. No Filter is produced by Bridget Northeast, and I will see you on Mamma Mia. This episode of No Filter was brought to you by Toyota Kluger.